Transfigured by a kiss from the angel of death, the frog returned as a prince. Muhammad Yasin Malik rode down his city's streets that morning in 1994, laying claim to his kingdom. Thousands had lined up on the streets of Srinagar, showering rose petals. 4 years earlier, Malik had been sent to prison accused of the murders of Indian Air Force officers and the kidnapping of Rubiya Saeed, the daughter of the then Union Home Minister. Till then, he'd been an obscure figure, born to a modest home. But after that day, Malik became Kashmir's most important secessionist leader. For months before Yasin Malik's release, Indian intelligence officials Amarjit Singh Dullat and Asif Ibrahim had plotted his coronation. Among their arsenal, gifts of suit fabric purchased from a store in Delhi's Connaught Place, the odd bottle of Black Label, and guile. This week, when a New Delhi court gave Malik a life sentence for financing terrorism, the prison door finally slammed shut, not just on him, but also on India's decades-old effort to bring peace to Kashmir by handing power to its secessionists. Now, the Narendra Modi government has a new roadmap for Kashmir. Like the old one though, this route is littered with landmines. Engaging enemies is the stuff of Indian counterinsurgency. Telangana, Mizoram, Manipur, Nagaland and Punjab all saw efforts to bribe, inveigle or ideologically co-opt enemies of the state with varying degrees of success. Kashmir's secessionists, India's intelligence services knew, had been enmeshed in the political system before the insurgency began. Top secessionist leaders such as Syed Ali Shah Gilani had fought multiple elections in the past. In the notorious rigged election of 1987, Malik had been a poll agent for the Muslim United Front candidate Muhammad Yusuf Shah, and Shah himself went on to become the head of the Hizbul Mujahideen. The core idea of the peace initiative India's spies carried out was simple: to lock the terrorist commanders back into electoral democracy. Following his release from prison in 1994, Malik declared a ceasefire, so it seemed to be paying off. The move was greeted with some wry smiles in the intelligence community. The Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front, Malik's group, had been pretty much decimated by attacks both by the Hizbul Mujahideen and India-backed militia groups. So Malik's turn to non-violence was underpinned as much by necessity as by principle. As Indian forces slowly degraded the Kashmir insurgency through the 1990s, this secret peace effort widened. Former Jamaat-e-Islami chief Ghulam Muhammad Bhatt emerged from prison in 1997 and called for, I quote, a political dialogue. 2 years later, Abdul Ghani Butt, a key leader of the secessionist All Parties Hurriyat Conference coalition, also asked for a dialogue with pro-India political parties. Then, in 2000, the dissident Hizbul Mujahideen commander Abdul Majid Dar began negotiations with the Indian government. Fazlul Haq Qureshi, the secessionist politician who kind of served as his informal envoy, proposed a solution involving, and again I quote, a semi-sovereign status for Jammu and Kashmir and joint control exercised by both India and Pakistan. This wasn't something acceptable to India, but it was a big step forward from outright secession. Even Pakistan's Inter-Services Intelligence Service became involved in this game. In 2002, the Research and Analysis Wing, or RAW, helped broker a meeting between the Hurriyat's Abdul Ghani Lone and the ISI chief, Lieutenant General Ehsan-ul Haq. Lone officials familiar with the dialogue say, unsuccessfully lobbied the ISI to support these peace negotiations. Unfortunately, he was assassinated soon after. Led by Dullat, New Delhi's negotiators scrambled to protect the dialogue from this jihadist assault. In January 2004, then Deputy Prime Minister L.K. Advani met with the Hurriyat leadership led by the cleric Mirwais Umar Farooq. There were more talks in March. Then former Prime Minister Manmohan Singh held 2 more rounds of dialogue in 2005. The former secessionist Sajjad Lone also met with Prime Minister Singh. Later, in February 2006, Malik himself held a one-on-one secret meeting with the former Prime Minister. Terrified of both the jihadists and their own political constituency though, the secessionist leadership held off on bringing a formal agenda to the table, let alone committing to electoral democracy. Frustrated, New Delhi turned to Islamabad instead. Following the India-Pakistan crisis of 2002, you see, military ruler General Pervez Musharraf had initiated a ceasefire on the line of control and scaled back support for Kashmir jihadists. General Musharraf understood that war would destroy his hopes of reviving Pakistan's economy. In 2005, Indian diplomat S.K. Lamba and his Pakistani counterpart Tariq Aziz began secret talks hammering out a deal involving Pakistan accepting the line of control as a border, but wide-ranging autonomy for both sides of Kashmir, a soft border if you like. The imprimatur from Islamabad seemed to persuade the secessionists. In one interview, Mirwais Farooq said, I quote, "The agenda is pretty much set. India and Pakistan are looking to announce something in September." 6 decades after Pakistani irregulars had first swept down the road to Srinagar, for a little while it looked like the curtain was about to fall on the long, grim war over Kashmir. What the Mirwais didn't know when he made that optimistic pronouncement was that the India-Pakistan deal had already begun to fall apart. Former Chief Minister Mufti Muhammad Saeed's People's Democratic Party had appropriated much of the Hurriyat's platform among secessionists and also deepened its links with the Jamaat-e-Islami and other jihadi supporters. The National Conference, politically cornered, also began courting the religious right wing. Then, in 2008, Pakistan's new army chief, General Ashfaq Parvez Kiani, delivered the death blow, quietly killing the secret peace plan for fear it would empower jihadists fighting his own army. Inside Kashmir itself, strains grew. For years, Islamist patriarch Sayyid Ali Shah Gilani, who had refused to join these peace talks, had been using ethnic religious issues to mobilize people against what he described as a sellout to India. He warned at a rally in Baramulla that India was seeking to, and I quote, change the Muslim majority into a minority by settling troops along with their families. Then he claimed India would either massacre Muslims as they did in Jammu in 1947 or carry out a genocide as was done in Gujarat. Late that summer, the breaking point came. Large-scale violence broke out all over Kashmir, led by a new Islamist cohort convinced that India was a threat to their ethnic identity and faith. The Hurriyat moderates and the National Conference should have resisted this tide. But competing for the Islamist political constituency in Kashmir, they had ended up ceding ground to Gilani and other Islamist extremists. 3 men holding the keys to history in their hands met in the parking lot in New Delhi's Khan Market in 2009 for a last-ditch effort at reviving the dying peace process. Mirwais Farooq, along with his Hurriyat colleagues Bilal Lone and Abdul Ghani Bhatt, were driven to a nearby intelligence bureau-run safe house to meet with the then Home Minister P. Chidambaram. There was little at the meeting though except mutual recrimination and anger. Nothing remained of the peace process that had begun with Yasin Malik's release in 1994. In May 2014, Manmohan Singh quietly handed over the files containing the unsigned minutes of his secret envoy's talks with Pakistan to Prime Minister Narendra Modi. In an effort, as the new Prime Minister put it, I quote, to turn the course of history, Modi reached out to his counterpart, Pakistani Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. Even band Baja Barat, though, didn't cut it with Pakistan's generals. Modi did develop a close relationship with Sharif, even showing up, you'll remember, impromptu for a family wedding near Lahore. But the ISI delivered attacks across Punjab and Kashmir in return. In 2019 came the Pulwama crisis and the revocation of Kashmir's special constitutional status. So is this the end of that road to peace? Efforts to engage secessionism are over. Malik's story makes this pretty clear. Mirbai's Farooq, you'll hardly hear any political statements from today. His former Hurriyat colleagues are also silent. Even in 2008, when the mass violence broke out, they had little ability left to influence events on the ground. Today, their power has diminished to vanishing point. Those who wield influence in Kashmir today are either those who embraced electoral politics like Sajad Lone or jihadists. Elections in Kashmir are expected in coming months on the back of a controversial delimitation of constituencies that I've discussed before. New Delhi will need legislators who do not undermine the constitutional changes brought since 2019 or seek to disrupt stability in the state. And that will need political dialogue with the Kashmir Valley's major political parties. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Pakistan Army Chief Qamar Javed Bajwa are known to maintain back-channel contacts. The Print had revealed back in March that Bajwa was pushing for India to restore some legal protections against the sale of land in Jammu and Kashmir to non-residents in return for keeping jihadists reined in. How far the outgoing army chief can go though, and how durable his promises will be, is obviously unclear. Facing intense military pressure on the line of actual control with China though, India needs peace with Pakistan. And Pakistan, which is fighting bankruptcy, needs peace with India. For both, it's vital that the road again doesn't lead to that ugly place called impasse. I'm Praveen Swami and I'm National Security Editor of ThePrint.